Dave, the air quality is very poor. Open the window to let some fresh air in. And maybe wake up a bit and finish that YouTube video.
Okay, I'm awake now. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to take the Everything Presence Lite, add the optional CO2 module, and hook up a simple RGB LED to visually show the air quality, and then build a simple automation that reacts and lets you know when it's time to get some fresh air. Now this builds from my earlier video where I set up the Everything Presence Lite and mmWave detection. So if you've already set that up, you're good to go. But if not, I'll link it in the description in case you want to follow along from the start. To get started, the CO2 module simply plugs into these pins here. Make sure you unplug the USB-C cable first, then connect the module, plug it back in, and we'll flash the firmware in just a moment. So let's jump over to the official documentation and walk through the steps. From the following web page where you would have purchased your CO2 module, I'm just going to scroll down. And from this section here under Manuals and Links, you've got Everything Presence 1 CO2 Integration Guide, and you've also got Everything Presence Lite CO2 Integration Guide. I'm going to click on the bottom one because that's the device I'm working with. Assuming you've already connected your CO2 module, I'm just going to scroll down to the How to Update the Firmware section. This is going to detail the steps for flashing the firmware. It's going to contain a link here, but just before I click on that, there's a really helpful section here where it gives you a guide in terms of what air quality is outdoor fresh air to what's significantly elevated and needs to be improved. If I just scroll down a little bit further, it's got the steps to calibrate your CO2 sensor, where it advises you to leave it by the window or outdoors for 5 minutes, and then you'll press the calibration button. And once you've done that, you can then put the device inside, and then the readings should be fairly accurate. If I just scroll back up again to the link to flash the firmware, we're now going to click on this. Now, before you panic and see this restore or update your Everything Presence Lite to factory settings using a computer, you aren't going to lose the entity ID names or values that you had set previously. As I just scroll down, if you make sure your Everything Presence Lite is now connected to a USB cable and plugged into the computer that you've got this web interface open with. For platform, because I'm doing this from Home Assistant, I'll be selecting the option on the left. You then need to choose the mmWave sensor. And if you're using the stock Everything Presence Lite, it will come with this LD2450. If you were using a different mmWave sensor, you can just click on Other Sensors Advanced and then choose the appropriate one here. But because I'm using the default one, I'm going to choose the first option. Then it's going to give you the option of Bluetooth proxy. This is optional, and in my scenario, I'm actually going to choose no, so it's disabled. It also states recommended if you have any Wi-Fi connection issues. And then for the final question, do you have the CO2 expansion module? Obviously, yes, I do. So I'm going to select yes, I have it. And now we're going to install the firmware. So I click on that button. You should get a pop-up on your screen, and I just happen to know it's USB serial COM port 5. You could always unplug it, and then when it disappears, you could just cancel the window, go back to the setting, and know what the COM port is. I'm going to choose Connect. And if you choose the top option, Install Everything Presence Lite, and it's just referencing no BLE because I selected no to Bluetooth proxy, and then it's referencing CO2, which is the module. Then I'm going to click Install, where it's just going to raise the device and reflash the firmware. If you do run into an issue like this error, you may need to press the boot button down, which is this button here. So I'm just going to refresh the page, hold the boot button down and try that again. That's looking better. As soon as you see a raising, there's a good chance it's going to be successful. This might take a couple of minutes, so if you just sit back and wait. Once installation is complete, if you click Next, and then if you just enter in your Wi-Fi details, password, and select Connect. And now you can either click Add to Home Assistant, or if you click Skip, when you then go into Home Assistant and Devices and Services, you should then see it as a discovered device. I'm going to click Skip because I've actually got 2 Home Assistant environments. And I can just close that window down. Now we're going to go into Home Assistant, so I'm going to open up a new tab. From Home Assistant, if you go to Settings, Devices and Services. Now, because I've previously added this to ESPHome and taken control, the discovered device is going to show with the option Reconfigure. So if we click Reconfigure, and into this following prompt where it mentions Disable Transport Encryption, please confirm that you want to remove the encryption key and allow unencrypted connections. If you just select Submit, re-authentication is successful, and now I can select Close. And while we're on this page, if we just do a search for ESPHome, and I'm just going to find that device, which is this one here. And now you can see under Sensors, you've got CO2. And if I just click on Settings, that's the entity ID for that CO2 sensor, in case you wanted to use it for an automation. For CO2 calibration, you'll see there's this button here called Calibrate CO2. And if I just recap and go back to the official documentation page, this is optional, and to be honest, I didn't bother calibrating mine and I found the readings were pretty good already. But if you do want to do it, these are the 4 steps. So you'll just need to place your sensor outdoor or near an open window with good airflow, give it about 5 minutes for the sensor to stabilize, and then from Home Assistant you're going to press that Calibrate CO2 button, where the value will then reset to 419. So if I just go back to the other tab in ESPHome, once you've left it outside for about 5 minutes, just give that button a press, and then you should see this value here is going to change to 419. Now, if you are only here to get the CO2 module set up, you're pretty much done at this point. But if you want to take it a step further, I'm going to add a simple RGB LED, just a small surface mount device breakout board from AliExpress, and use it to visually show the air quality. Quick wiring overview. This LED has 5 volts ground and a data input pin labeled DIN. That just means digital in. So we just connect 5 volts and ground and then run the data line from DIN to one of the 3 GPIO pins on the Everything Presence Lite. To mount the LED neatly, I've used a small prototype PCB. I've cut it down to size, soldered on the header pins, and wired up 5 volts ground and the data line so it connects to GPIO 19. That way, it plugs straight into the Everything Presence Lite. Just make sure you're using the DIN pin, the data input, not DOUT. Otherwise, it won't work. Once you've got the LED wired up, we need to tell ESPHome what it is and which GPI pin it's connected to. So let's head over and update the configuration. From Home Assistant, if you go into ESPHome Builder, and I'm just going to find my device, which is this one here, and click Edit. Now I'm going to paste in some YAML to enable this RGB LED. This will be using pin GPIO 19. It's one LED, and I've just given it the name EPL RGB LED. Now, just before we save and flash the device, there's one headache you're going to experience, which is this section here. In my previous video, when I set this up, I didn't initially have the CO2 module installed. So when I added the discovered device into Home Assistant and allowed ESPHome to take control, it defaulted to using this package, which uses the device base, which is the Everything Presence Lite, the LD2450, which is the mmWave sensor, and enables Bluetooth proxy, but doesn't include the CO2 module. So as soon as I flash this, the CO2 module is going to disappear. And if I just take you to this web page, I can explain it a little bit better. This is the package it's referring to, Everything Presence Lite HA. And it's these three packages which it's referencing. You've got the device base, LD2450, and the Bluetooth proxy. We need to also include CO2 module. If I just go back one step and click here, as I scroll down, you'll see there's various different packages, and these are all using the Everything Presence Lite, but it's based on the different setups that you would have chose when going through the official guide. So you've got one here, which is the Home Assistant Lite, and it includes the CO2. Then you've got this one here, which is using the Everything Presence Lite, but it's a different mmWave sensor and the CO2, and so on. So all the different variations, it uses one of those packages. So if I just click on this top one here, and now I scroll down, you'll now notice there's a fourth package, which is the CO2 base package that we need. So assuming you're going to be using the stock LG2450 mmWave sensor, you want Bluetooth proxy to be enabled, and you want to use the CO2 base, this is the package that you'll want to use. So if I go back into ESPHome, and then from this section here, I just need to add -CO2. Now when I flash this board from ESPHome, not only is it going to add this extra light, but it's still going to keep the CO2 module because it's referencing the correct package. So just bear that in mind, because if you are going to start tinkering in ESPHome and you're taking advantage of the spare GPIO pins to add something custom, you may run into the same problem where the CO2 module suddenly stops working, and that may be the reason why. So now we're going to flash that Everything Presence Lite. So if we click on Install, and I'm going to choose wirelessly, and then just wait for it to recompile and flash the firmware. Now that that's finished flashing, I'm just going to click Stop to close that window. And before I go into Devices and Services to find it, I'm going to leave this tab open because there's a good chance it might ask for the encryption key. So if you go into Settings, Devices and Services, and now you should see the Everything Presence Lite and it's prompting to reconfigure. So if I click on that, and yep, it's asking for the encryption key. So if I go back to the other tab on ESPHome, and I'm just going to copy that. And now I'm going to paste in that encryption key. Click Submit. And then click Close. Now we're going to go into ESPHome to find that device. So if you just do a search for ESPHome, and I'm going to scroll down and find it, which is this one here. And you can see I've got Everything Presence Lite RGB LED. And I'm just going to overlay a camera so that as I toggle off and on, you can see the RGB LED is turning off and on. And if I click into it, I can also change the color. Perhaps if I want it to be red or maybe green. And I'm just going to add the cover on top. Now if I change it back to red, looks quite nice. Now that the RGB LED is working, along with the CO2 module, let's create a simple automation. Looking at the documentation, it gives you a rough guide for air quality levels, so I'm going to use that to define what's good and what's poor. In this case, I'll treat everything below 700 as good air quality and everything above 700 as poor. So the way this will work is if the CO2 levels stay below 700 for 10 minutes, the LED will turn green. If it goes above 700 for 10 minutes, the LED will turn red. And on top of that, if the air quality is poor, it will also send a notification to my phone and trigger an announcement, but only if presence is detected using the mmWave sensor. So let's jump over to Home Assistant and create this automation. From Home Assistant, if you go into Settings, Automations and Scenes, and then select Create Automation, Create New Automation, and if you click on those three dots and select Edit in YAML, and I'm just going to paste in this example code which I have shared in GitHub, so there'll be a link in the description. To make this YAML a little bit clearer to describe, I've added comments. Unfortunately, when I save it, the comments will disappear, or if I click on these three dots and toggle to Edit in Visual Editor, they will also disappear. But hopefully this might help you when using the code, because you won't need to understand YAML on an advanced level. All you'll really need to understand is which entity IDs to change. So starting from the top, you've got these two triggers. The first one, which is this, is when your CO2 sensor is below 700, it's going to set the trigger ID to 1. And then this one is when your CO2 sensor is above 700, it will set the trigger ID to 2. If I just scroll down to the actions, you've got these two actions. The first action, which is this one, when the trigger ID is 1, which is when the CO2 is below 700, it's going to turn on the light of my custom RGB LED and it will make it the color green, which is 02550, and it will have the brightness as 100. When the trigger ID is set to 2, which is when the CO2 is above 700, it's going to turn the light on of my custom RGB LED, but this time it's going to make it red, which is 25500, and with the brightness of 100. If I just scroll down a little bit further, there's also some additional conditions. You may want these or you might want to change them. I've added these extra conditions where if presence is detected and it's between 8 AM and 10 PM, then it's going to broadcast an announcement on my Amazon Echo device and also send a notification on my phone. So this part here is where it's going to send an announcement on my Amazon Echo device. And this part here is where it will send an announcement on all mobile phones with the Home Assistant app installed. Now, in terms of finding the entity IDs, if I just quickly open up another tab, if you go into Settings, Devices and Services, and we're just going to go into ESPHome and find that device. Starting off with the CO2 sensor, this will be the entity ID which you will need to copy. The RGB LED will be this, and that's the entity ID you'll need to copy. Or you may have your own WLED setup and you're using a different light. Occupancy is going to be this one, and there's the entity ID. And to get your Amazon Echo device, if I just go back and do a search for Alexa, this is the one I'm using. And if I just click here, it's this section you'll need to copy. So if I just go back where it says your Alexa device, you'll need to update this part. Notify.alexa_media_ you still leave, but it's just this particular part in uppercase. I'm just going to jump into the future where I've already updated the entity IDs to real values. So now all those entity IDs are real values. And if I just click on those three dots and select Edit in Visual Editor, and just warning you, as soon as I click on this, I am going to lose the comments. This will help give you a visual representation of how the automation will work. So from the when section, you've got these two options. So the first one is when the CO2 is below 700 for 10 minutes, it's going to set the trigger ID to 1. The next is more or less the opposite. When the CO2 is above 700 for 10 minutes, it's going to set the trigger ID to 2. You've then got these two options. Option 1 is when trigger ID is 1. It's going to turn on the RGB LED and set it to green with the brightness set to 100%. Option 2, which is a little bit more complicated. When trigger ID is set to 2, it's going to turn the RGB LED on and set the color as red, and the brightness will be 100%. And you'll see this extra option here. If I just expand it, this is an additional condition where if the occupancy is detected and it's between 8 AM and 10 PM, it's going to broadcast a notification to my Amazon Echo device, and it's also going to send a notification to all the mobile phones with the Home Assistant app installed. I'm just going to toggle back to the YAML. So if I click on these three dots and select Edit in YAML, straight away you're going to see the comments has gone, but at least me sharing the code with the comments hopefully made the explanations a bit clearer for you. I'm now going to click Save, leave that as it is and click Rename. And now the automation is created. Now that the automation is in place, let's see what happens when the air quality drops.
Dave, the air quality is very poor. Open the window to let some fresh air in.
So that's how you can use the Everything Presence Lite with a CO2 module and a simple RGB LED to monitor your air quality and get notified when it starts to drop. I'll include the full setup, wiring diagram and YAML in my GitHub repo and put a link in the description if you want to try it out yourself. If you found this video useful, give it a like and consider subscribing to be notified when the next video is available. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.